Welcome to Pleasure Uprising. I'm Dr. Laura Juergens, intimacy coach, somatic practitioner, and your guide to getting out of your head and into your body, your desire, and your real capacity for connection. This show is for people who are done performing and ready to actually feel it. Let's go. Hey everyone, welcome. Today, we are going to talk about some real client data and real client stories I am excited to share with you. So I've been thinking for, the last week I've been especially thinking about what it's like to be stuck for a while somewhere. I remember what that felt like for me. And I think one of the things that's really a giant bummer about being stuck in a particular sort of modus operandi, like just a way of being for a while, especially if it doesn't feel great, is that it can start feeling like your identity, like who you are. So when you're having a struggle with something, when something is hard, including sex, intimacy, connection in your relationship, emotional connection, physical connection, right? Even just connection to yourself, which if you've been around here a while, you know that to me is absolutely the foundation of connection with anybody else. And connection with your sexuality inside you is the most important part to being able to have a really fulfilling sex life. Not your performance for somebody else, but what lights you up and really being connected to yourself. But when you haven't been there for a while, or when you feel like you have a sense of what you want, but you're having a really hard time connecting to your partner, or there's something just not working in your sex life, it can start feeling like that's just normal. It's been like this for so long. People say things like this to me all the time, right? I've never really felt differently, so I don't even know what that would be like. Or I'm just overwhelmed every time I try to think of how this could be even different because I can't even imagine it. Or it just felt like it's been this way for so long that it's impossible to change. And a lot of times too, this gets reinforced when you've tried the wrong tools. Like you've tried something, but it hasn't worked. So that can reinforce the idea that this quote unquote nothing works. Of course, that's not true. It was just the wrong tool, but it can really feel like nothing works. And so I've been there and I've really been thinking about what it feels like when you are there. And so I wanted to bring you this episode in particular because for me, when I was in a place where I wasn't really even in the I need to figure this out thing about my own sexuality, I was just kind of like, is this who I am? Is this it? Is this all I get? It started to feel like this is just sort of the normal, in part because I think when we're there, we kind of try to wait it out as if it's going to magically get better on its own, and it doesn't. And then we start identifying with being in the problem, almost as if we are the problem or our partner is the problem. And I think it's so important to actually start looking outside of ourselves and outside of our relationship to see some evidence that other people who have been in the same place we are can change it. We get that in a lot of areas in life. Maybe you are wanting to become stronger. Maybe you want to build more muscle mass, and you can look around and see people who have done that, and you can get inspiration on, whatever social media platform of choice. It's a lot harder to do that about your sex life and about your, marriage or your really close romantic partnership. Or it's so much harder because there's not a lot of people showing you real data and real transformation. It feels really private for a lot of people. They're not sharing that. So I wanted to bring some anonymized client stories that, I have in my practice permission to share so that you get that when you don't always get to see those kinds of behind the scenes things. So that's what we're doing here today. We're going to help you try to wiggle this erroneous belief, this not true belief that wherever you're stuck is just like who you are now. And I want to do that by giving you some real data, real people, real numbers, and I'm going to walk you through what their goals were. You can see if any of those resonate with you and at least get some examples of the types of places that people are feeling stuck. These are not all of my clients. That would be way too long of a podcast for you. But these are just a few people that I think span some common issues. Okay, so let me tell you about where these data come from. So a little bit on my tracking system. When every client starts with me, they identify their most important intentions or goals, and they rate their current level of fulfillment from 0 being completely unfulfilled in that area to 10 being completely fulfilled in that area. And so we do that in the beginning. We go over it to make sure I understand very clearly what exactly their intentions and goals are, so we can stay focused on getting them there over the time that we work together. And then we check in periodically, right, along the way. And people tend to work with me for, most people actually work with me for about 6 to 9 months. Some people work with me for 3 months. Some people work with me for longer, depending on where they're starting and how much trauma they have and what all other goals come forward, because sometimes people have had such good success that they decide to stay on and work on other stuff. Great. But what we're going to focus on today are people who've worked with me for 3 to 6 months, so you can see what changed for them in that period. And I've changed everybody's names, so these are anonymized. So let's start with Jamie. So she is an individual. She's a woman. She's in her 30s. She came in. She worked with me for 6 months. And when she started, Jamie had been basically in this avoidance pattern, avoiding sex with her partner. She felt quite criticized a lot of times. And she's described how she showed up as feeling kind of wooden, like she was trying to do it right. She was a person who was trying to do everything in her life right, because she was also really, really hyper competent, but she wasn't feeling present in her body. She was feeling completely up in her head. And she hadn't ever experienced really joyful, pleasurable sex. So her main goals, she had 3 main goals when she came to me. 1, comfort with my own sexuality. She rated that a 3 out of 10 with the level of fulfillment that she was at. This is also a person who, side note, had been doing a lot of other work. And that's really common for people who come to me. Like, they've done therapy. They've done a lot of times, sometimes they've even done other types of coaching. But they've done, all kinds of work on themselves. They've gone to, they've read the books. They've done all the stuff. So, they've gotten less shame about many things in their lives, but this is still an area where they're stuck. And so Jamie was one of those people. So her comfort with her own sexuality, that was her number 1 intention. That was a 3 out of 10 in fulfillment. Her second intention was getting out of her head and overcoming fear. She described just a lot of anxiety around sexuality, and that she was afraid to do it wrong, right? And that was part of why she was in her head. So that's why she put those 2 things together. And her level of fulfillment, getting out of her head and overcoming fear, was a 3. The third goal she had was fun. She wanted to have sex that was actually comfortable and enjoyable for her. And her current level of fulfillment with that when she came to me was a 1. Side note, this is interesting. Almost nobody ever says a 0 or a 10. So everybody pretty much always puts themselves in a 1 to a 9. And I think it's an interesting thing about humans. Like, we never think we're completely and utterly unfulfilled with something, or completely done with all of our work. And I think that's wise, actually. So it was interesting. So it was, either a 1 or a 3 for all of her goals. Comfort with her own sexuality, getting out of her head, overcoming fear, and having sex that was actually fun, right? So where did she wind up? So 6 months later, quick break. If you are listening to this show, something in your intimate life may not be where you want it to be. And if you've been trying to think or talk your way through it and it's not quite working, that's not a you problem. That's just a method problem. I made a free guide to help called Get Out of Your Head, a starter guide to releasing the pressure, shame, and shoulds around intimacy. It has some reflection exercises that go deeper than anything you'll typically find in a freebie, And most people feel something shift after just the first one. So go grab it at laurajurgens.com/guide, and the link is in the show notes. Her comfort with her sexuality was a 7. Out of her head, 9. Fun, enjoyable sex, 8. And so she moved on all of those goals substantially. And she told me she left myself some wiggle room because I know I can do even better, but I'm really happy with where I'm at right now. And so I want to read her quote to you. So what she said at the end of that 6 months was, I'm having better sex than I ever thought possible. I can actually ask for what I want with no shame. I'm out of my head finally and really in my body. And it's just totally fun. So, and she and her partner were just having like the time of their life. And he had stopped criticizing her. Incidentally, we had a session or two about that. And also had discovered that she was pretty amazing at sex when she wasn't in her head and wasn't being criticized and wasn't feeling anxious about it, right? And she got there. She totally got there. And she wanted to keep a couple extra points in reserve for her future, which I am so excited about because I know it's like just going to keep growing from there. But she had the tools and she was able to then fly free without my scaffolding to build the rest of her joy and satisfaction because she's already at, a 7 to a 9 on every single one of her goals. That's 6 months from a person who'd never had fun or enjoyable sex before in her life. She went from a 1 to an 8, right? And I say this because I really want to have that land, right? That she was not at a starting place that she felt was easy to tackle. She came in exhausted and really not sure that anything could change. And it was it's always an absolute pleasure to see people like blossom into themselves and have so much joy and fun and just like open up and stop being ashamed and like talking she would come to sessions and just be like lit up talking about all the fun sex that they had and like describing how she felt so much more free in her body. And it's just such a pleasure for me. I mean, my job is amazing. I love it. But I want you to see that she started in a rough place, right? She never had fun, enjoyable sex. She had always been anxious. And that can change. So even if you're a person who starts there, it can change. And I'm not saying any of this and any of these client stories to tell you have to work with me or to sell you on my coaching or whatever. I mean, yes, I have a business. Yes, I sell coaching. But my purpose in this podcast is never to hard sell anybody, especially about working with me. Like, we should only work together if we're the right fit. But I want you to believe that you can have what you want. I really want you to believe that you can have things be different for you and not to give up on yourself. And that's what I want you to get from that story. Okay, so that's one person. Let's look at a couple. So we're going to call them Gregory and Amy. And they were married for 10 years. I coached them both at times individually and at times together, which is how I always work with couples. And this is the context for where they were at when they came to me. So Amy described herself as a low desire partner, and she said, I feel really shut down. She was a working professional, also really smart, really competent, really had kind of a new ADHD diagnosis, wasn't sure how that was playing in, had some relational trauma from family history, which is also really common in my practice, and I myself have, so I really understand where that plays a role. It really does play a big role. We can't discount it. And Gregory was actually somewhat similar, but his way of kind of coping with things in his attachment history was to really put a lot of emphasis on sex as personal validation for himself. And so when Amy didn't want to have sex, he took rejection really hard and he felt undesirable. He was having a lot of body image issues. He was feeling frustrated and he was feeling really like he didn't know how to ask for what he needed. until he would kind of get to this point where he was feeling uber rejected and frustrated and had already hit his limit, and then they were fighting, right? Which was not helping them get back to sexy times. So when they started, I'm going to give you both Amy's goals and Gregory's goals, because everybody sets individual goals, even as couples, because you are individual humans who are starting in different places, and you both have needs that are individual to you, and they deserve space and intention aside from your goals as a couple. So Amy, her 3 top goals. One was move past shame to accept the sexual parts of myself. She had a lot of religious shame growing up. She had a lot of body shame occupying the world as a person socialized as a woman. And so her level of fulfillment on moving past shame to accept the sexual parts of herself was a 2 when she started. Then second goal was to regularly desire authentic intimacy with my partner. And that was a 3 out of 10 in the beginning. Her third goal was to identify and enforce my own limits with confidence. And that was a 2. She was having a really hard time with people pleasing and crossing her own boundaries and trying to soothe Gregory's worries and sense of rejection by overriding her own desire and having sex when she didn't want to, which was actually compounding the problem for both of them, even though they didn't know it. But she had part of her relational trauma history was that she was really trained at home as a people pleaser. And that was a way of creating safety for herself as a child. And so it made sense that she then did that in her sex life, right? So her third goal, identifying and enforcing her own limits with confidence, was a 2 when she started. Okay, so let's look. I want to just stick with Amy because we're on that train of thought right now. So let's look at what her shifts were. So I'm going to give you, so their 3-month check-in, which is a little bit before, actually like 10 weeks we check in. So we have a little bit of wiggle room to do some extra work if we need to bump things up, but their 10-week check-in, she had, from moving past shame to accepting the sexual parts of herself, she had moved from a 2 to a 7. Yay. Big celebration on that for her. And that was pretty awesome. On regularly desiring authentic intimacy with her partner, she'd moved from a 3 to a 7 in 10 weeks. Yay. Again, amazing. Number 3, identifying and enforcing her own limits with confidence. She moved from a 2 to a 9. Again, awesome. That's 10 weeks. That's so great. And then I want to give you her final numbers because, so she had a 7, and a 9, right, in her goals. And our last check-in, she had a 9, a 9, and a 9, right? And so again, people almost never give themselves a 10 because we want to give ourselves some wiggle room to improve and grow in the future. That's awesome. But so we can even go to moving past shame to accept the sexual parts of herself. So you can see she had a really big leap in the beginning, and then she just had a little bit of extra room to solidify it and grow it a bit in the last few months. And I think the numbers don't really tell you about all of the work that happens, right? That's not what we're doing here today. We're kind of trying to show you how people can accomplish their own goals and kind of blow their own minds, even when they didn't realize that it was even possible where they started. But I think it's really telling, these numbers at 3 and 6 months, because those sort of final bumps that happen are really about being able to do it on your own so that you can feel really confident when you graduate. Like, I've got this. I don't need to necessarily be having the scaffolding there to hold me by having like regular sessions every week. I now know how to do this for myself. And that's one of the things that the numbers don't totally capture, but that's really embedded in there, is that she not only bumped up further at the 6 month, but then she knew how to do it for herself and it wasn't shaky. So that number 2, regularly desiring authentic intimacy with my partner, went from a 3 to a 7 at 3 months, and then a 9 at 6 months. Awesome. And the identifying and enforcing her own limits with confidence, this is the boundaries work. She went from a 2 to a 9 over 3 months, and then she stayed at the 9 for the 6 months, which was awesome. And for her, that was a lot about not just sort of white knuckling doing it and feeling scared while doing it, but being able to really do it and also to have Gregory support her doing it. And that was really beautiful to see. Okay, what about Gregory? So his numbers. He had 4 initial main goals. 1, more regular sex that's playful and doesn't feel like there's pressure. So that was one of his goals. He said he was a 1 when he started. They were not having regular sex, and it certainly did not feel playful, and it did feel like there was a lot of like hidden pressure going on, both for him in terms of performance to like make it extra amazing for her so she'd want to do it again, and he could tell that she felt kind of pressured, that undercurrent of, okay, she's doing this for me, but not really for herself, which doesn't feel great. So that's why he set that goal. And the second goal for him, feeling okay in himself when they're not having sex. And he started out as a 4. So a 4 out of 10. He said, I'm doing better than I was before I went to therapy. And he's, just with general self-esteem. But when we don't have sex, I still really feel bad. And the third one was advocating for himself before getting overly frustrated. So this was like how to speak up for my emotional needs, my needs for affection, my needs for connection before I get super frustrated. He was a 2 when he started. And then the last one was feeling comfortable and desirable in my body. And he was a 3 out of 10 when he started. So I'm going to do the same with Gregory's numbers and tell you the 3-month and the 9 and the 6-month. So number 1, more regular sex that's playful and there's no pressure. He went from a 1 to a 6 at 3 months to an 8.5 at 6 months. And so you can see again, there's that trajectory, big improvement, right? Further improvement and solidifying. So they're having more regular sex. It's feeling playful. It's not feeling pressured. It went from a 1 to a 6 to an 8.5. I love it when people decide to do decimal points because I'm kind of like that too. Feeling okay in myself when I'm not having sex. He started out as a 4. He went to a 7 by week 10. And then at 6 months was a 9. So feeling okay in myself when I'm not having sex, overall from a 4 to a 9 in level of fulfillment. Advocating for himself before hitting frustration, from a 2 to a 6 at 3 months to a 9 at 6 months. And then feeling comfortable and desirable in my body went from a 3 to a 6 at 3 months to an 8.5 again at 6 months. So that's pretty great. 8.5 out of 10 in terms of fulfillment, feeling comfortable and desirable in his body. That's body image change, right? Over 6 months. So those are some pretty big goals. And so I just want to reflect on how massive it is to make these changes in 6 months when you've been sitting on this stuff for 10 years, right? Like, that's a big deal for people. And their levels of fulfillment, self-reported on their self-identified goals, tell us that they really got a lot of movement from the work that they themselves did and that they put in, right? And I think also the really important thing about this couple story is that sometimes when there's a desire gap or like a libido discrepancy, and that's the presenting issue, we think that's the main thing, right? It's usually not the only thing. There's like a whole constellation of stuff going on. And you can see that when you even just listen to the people's goals individually, that it's not just about having more sex and having better sex. That's part of it. But there's also all these other pieces that are really important. And it's not a story of one person's problem. It's 2 bodies, 2 nervous systems, 2 histories, 2 sets of patterns and coping mechanisms, right? 2 sets of attachment wounds. And, the work from one person feeds back in a positive way to support the other person, right? The more that Gregory was feeling comfortable and desirable in his body, the easier it was for his partner to desire him. Because I can promise you that when somebody's having a lot of body image issues, it is not sexy. It's not sexy when you're constantly trying to prop up your partner's ego, or you're feeling like you're on the hook for having sex with them so that they feel better about themselves. That is not hot. It's not, right? So you can see how these things actually play into each other and support each other's fulfillment, and then the fulfillment of the couple together. So awesome. Kudos to them. I am super proud of them and so glad I got to work with them. Okay, last person I'm going to give you today, Bethany. This is an individual, higher libido woman. Her partner's not in coaching and she's still working with me. So I'm going to give you just her 3-month numbers. And here's where she started. So this is, again, man, all my clients are so amazing. Like, she's really smart, competent person, really just brilliant, gorgeous, fantastic person. Love seeing her every week. She's starting as the higher desire partner, and her self-worth had really gotten completely tangled up in whether her partner wanted her or not. Lots of being up in her head about it, lots of making meaning out of whatever avoidance he was going through. Partner is sort of in a sex avoidant space, and she's kind of just like waiting and hoping and feeling bad, and also recognizing that she was doing a lot of things to try to make him feel good so that she would get sex but not talk about it. So like a lot of people pleasing patterns in general, and really not feeling good about herself. So her goals that she came to me with was 1, stopping people pleasing. She was a 1. I don't want my self-worth to be tied to whether my partner wants sex. That was a 3. Getting out of my head and into my body. That was a 2 out of 10. And feeling good about myself and not worrying so much was a 3. Okay, fast forward 10 weeks. This is it's technically 2.5 months, but we'll call it the 3-month check-in. Stopping people pleasing went from a 1 to a 7. Self-worth no longer tied to whether her partner initiates went from a 3 to an 8. Getting out of her head and into her body went from a 2 to a 6. Feeling good about herself and stopping the constant worry went from a 3 to an 8. And okay, so badass, right? Like, I mean, what a badass. She's amazing. And I absolutely love this for her so much. I think the numbers all speak for themselves. And all that change happens without her partner even coming to coaching, even being aware of the coaching happening, right? Which is really common. I have a lot of clients who don't tell their partners initially that they're getting coaching for various legitimate reasons. Oftentimes it will eventually be something that they want to share, but in the beginning it can feel kind of fragile, or it can feel like they don't want their partner to have expectations, or they can feel kind of ashamed because they're still carrying all this sexual shame around their desires and their wants. And that's totally legitimate. This is private. It can be private. You're allowed to work on yourself without explaining to anyone. You're allowed to invest in yourself without explaining to anyone, and it's totally legitimate. Oftentimes I will help people once they're ready to start talking to their partner about it. We'll practice how we might have that conversation so it feels easy. And that usually goes really well. A lot of times people's partners kind of are like wondering what they're doing and actually ask about it because things are starting to feel so much better in the relationship that they're like, so what kind of magic are you doing lately? Because this is so much nicer. And so that's sometimes how it comes out. And so that to say, this is one person doing this work on her own, and she's having real results without even needing her partner to participate yet, and feeling really good about her own sexuality without even needing him to change. And from that place, it actually puts so much less pressure on the partner to change that oftentimes they start changing anyway. And she'd actually seen some evidence of that already. So I think there's more to do once we actually get everything out in the open, right? And start really working with both of them together. And she might add some other goals in the future. around that. But right now, she's feeling really solid in herself and really great about breaking her own patterns. And I absolutely love that for her. Because when one person in a dynamic changes, the whole dynamic changes. And you don't actually always need both people in the room, and certainly not to start at the same time. So I just want to say, like, this, I hope that some of this resonated. Maybe the intentions or goals resonated with you. Maybe you can see yourself in some of those. People come to me with all kinds of different intentions and goals that they're setting, but these are some pretty common ones. And I think at large in our culture, there's this idea that somehow we're supposed to just magically know how to do sex and intimacy. And if you need help with desire, arousal, intimacy, or connection, relationships, relationship ruptures, that something is just fundamentally broken and you're like incompatible. Like this happily ever, it's like the dark side of happily ever after movies, right? Where we just assume everything's perfect forever. And then what our brain does is it tells us if we have trouble that we were just quote unquote not meant to be or something. And we're just supposed to like either stick it out and suffer, or we're supposed to get divorced and find a new partner. Well, pro tip, most people are going to repeat the same patterns with the new partner that they did with the old one unless they learn some new ways of being. And that's not a bad thing to have to learn some new ways of being. And it's not a bad thing to break up and start over. I have no judgment for any of that. In fact, sometimes it's absolutely the right call. But just because something isn't working doesn't mean that you are doomed or that this is just all you get or how it is. It doesn't mean that it's something you have to stay stuck with, and it can really change, and it doesn't take the same 10 years it took to get there, right? And people with great sex lives didn't just naturally, magically figure it out. They either had fewer obstacles, which a few people are fortunate enough to be born into really sex-positive families that are not dysfunctional and somehow magically help them with that, or they had help, or both. And most of the time, people who have magical, wonderful sex lives have really done it intentionally through a lot of hard work. And so I want to just show you, like couple notes about the method here, because I'm not telling you this is the only method. But I want to tell you my method because I know it works, and that's why I track it, to make sure that I get feedback enough to continue learning and growing and making sure what I'm doing works for people. I frankly am not a person who'd be able to sell anything that didn't actually work for people, nor would that actually work for my business model, since most of my clients come through referrals. But this isn't the only method. It's just the one that I know works. And I call it the pleasure path method. It moves through 4 stages so that there is a plan. This doesn't just happen by us like getting together and staring at each other, right? We are working. So number 1, first stage, understand your nervous system, your personal history, your relational history, and the actual relationship dynamics that are going on, and really get curious about it. It's all about curiosity about who you are. What is your unique erotic makeup? Right. And number 2, discover. And so then we start getting curious again about what is it that your body actually responds to? What is it that lights you up? What is it that hits your brakes? What is going on for you? We get really interested in figuring out sort of the shape of your puzzle piece, is how I think about it. And then 3 is what I call express, which is learning to communicate what you want, what you need, what you don't want in comfort without bracing for disconnection, right? How to communicate boundaries kindly, how to express all of the things you need to express to have a truly magical, intimate life. And then the last one is 4 is connect, which is where we integrate everything into a relationship if you're in one, or into relational skills if you are single and you are wanting to have relationship with other people. So we're learning about things like how to repair, how to really listen to someone, how to really validate yourself so that you can come to a conversation cleanly and ask for what you want, right? We're not just learning about this stuff. We're actually building new patterns in your body through practice. And that's what I do in my practice is we practice. So it's like reading about swimming doesn't make you a better swimmer, right? We want to practice swimming just like you want to practice these embodied relational skills. So none of this was like magic wands. Now, if I had a magic wand for you, I would absolutely sell that. That would be a hot ticket item, but I don't. It does take effort and time and a money investment because I also have bills to pay too, right? But there's real results and real movement. And I'm also not the only way to do this, but I do want to say that it is possible. Whatever you choose to do, please don't get stuck in the place of believing that this is all you get or it can't ever be different or nothing works, because that stuff is actually just not true. And I hope these client numbers have shown you that that's not true. Even when you start from a pretty rough place where you don't have a lot of hope or a lot of evidence, it can really change. So thanks for being here. I'll see you next week. Hey, before you go, if you enjoyed this show, I want to invite you to check out one of my favorite things that I've ever created. It's a free guide called Get Out of Your Head, a starter guide to releasing the pressure, shame, and shoulds around intimacy. It has 4 reflection exercises that go deeper than anything you'll find in a typical freebie, and most people feel a shift just after part 1. So go grab it at laurajurgens.com/guide. The link is in the show notes. And if you're ready to find out what your specific path looks like, I'd love to talk to you. Booking info is also in the show notes, and I will see you here next week.